Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. It was the kind of evening that slips in quietly, unnoticed at first. The sky painted with a soft lavender mist. The birds, having sung their final hymns, now silent in the trees. And in a small town where time moved a little slower, an old wooden porch light flickered on, like a whisper saying, "You're still welcome here." Evelyn sat in her rocking chair, her hands gently folded, her breathing slow. At 81, she had seen many sunsets, but tonight felt heavier. Not because of pain or sorrow, but because life had simply worn her thin. She didn't want anything grand anymore. No noise, no explanation, no fixing, just someone to sit with her, quietly. Just a hand on her hand, just the sound of love being near. She looked out over her garden, where the lavender bloomed despite everything, where the old bench still stood beneath the willow. She whispered aloud, "Jesus, are you sitting out there tonight?" And she could almost hear the answer, not out loud, but in her soul. "I never left. I'm always here, even when you feel forgotten." Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She remembered how, as a little girl, she used to lay in her grandmother's lap as hymns floated through a quiet farmhouse. There was something holy in that ordinary comfort, something eternal in being held without having to speak. Now she sat alone, or so it seemed, but something in her bones knew better. There was presence, not in the creaking of the chair, not in the wind through the screen door, but in the quiet warmth that lingered like a shawl over her shoulders. She let out a slow sigh, and for the first time that day, she didn't feel like she had to hold anything together. She didn't have to be wise, didn't have to be strong, didn't have to figure out what came next. She just had to sit and let Jesus be near. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not a burden to God. You don't have to carry it alone tonight. He's already sitting beside you. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Psalm 23, 2-3. The kitchen was dim, but not dark. The kind of light that settles like a hush. The clock on the wall ticked its gentle rhythm, and the old kettle began to hum on the stove. Evelyn reached for the teacup she always used at night, the one with the tiny chip on the rim, the one that had belonged to her mother. Somehow, that little imperfection made it more beloved, more honest, more like life. The warm water poured slowly, curling steam rising like a prayer. She wrapped both hands around the cup and stood still for a long time. The silence in the kitchen wasn't empty. It was full of every conversation whispered across that worn table, full of laughter that had echoed long ago, full of prayers she had prayed when no one else knew she was breaking. She carried the tea to the table and sat where she always did, back to the window, facing the cross above the door. "Thank you," she whispered, not for anything in particular, but because she had made it through another day, and not just made it through, but reached this sacred moment where there was warmth in her cup, peace in her breath, and the quiet knowledge that she wasn't abandoned. She thought about the shepherd, not just the idea of him, but the real Jesus, the one who knew what tired bones felt like, the one who knew the ache behind unspoken thoughts. She imagined him standing in the doorway, not saying anything, just watching her with love. No rush, no judgment, just a presence that filled the room the way sunlight fills morning curtains. She took a slow sip, and for the first time all week, she wasn't bracing for anything. She wasn't reviewing her mistake. She wasn't measuring her usefulness. She was simply here, with him. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There had been many years when the kitchen was loud and full, when children spilled juice and laughter, when pots clanged and flour danced in the air. Those days had been good, but this quiet had its own kind of holiness. In the hush, she began to remember something she'd forgotten, that grace doesn't need noise to be present. It lingers even when the room is still, even when the air feels heavy, even when you feel small and worn and weary. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Grace is still in your kitchen, still in your breathing, still in the warmth of a quiet night with Jesus. The wind blows where it wishes. You hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. John 3:8. Later that evening, Evelyn stepped outside once more. The air was cooler now, the kind of cool that touches the skin but doesn't steal warmth from the soul. She made her way slowly down the porch steps, worn slippers brushing against the dew-kissed wood. And there, beyond the small garden gate, the pines waited, tall, unwavering, their silhouettes like ancient guardians holding stories in their branches. The breeze rustled softly through them, a sound she had always loved, not loud like the city or the clamor of day, but soft, like breath, like memory, like God. She walked the narrow path along the edge of the trees, where pine needles blanketed the ground like prayer mats. Her steps were unhurried. There was no need for speed now, no appointments to keep, no one waiting for answers. Only the wind and the Lord who had walked with her through so many seasons. She paused by her favorite tree, the one that leaned just slightly to the right, as if it too were tired from the years. She placed her hand against the bark. Rough, real, faithful, just like the one she prayed to. And as the wind moved gently around her, she closed her eyes. It felt like something was being carried away, not taken violently, but lifted as though the breath of God was sweeping through her spirit, unknotting the tiredness, untangling the questions she didn't need answers to anymore. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. In the soft hush of that pine grove, she knew what prayer really was, not a speech, but a leaning into love, leaning into peace, leaning into the truth that the Spirit was always moving, even when she couldn't feel it. Even when the world felt quiet, God was still speaking. Take a deep breath, rest here for a moment. She remembered a time long ago when she had wept beneath these trees. Grief had brought her here, and in her tears, she had asked God why. Tonight she didn't ask. Tonight she simply let the wind carry it all. Like a lullaby written by heaven itself, she stood for a while longer, letting the pine-scented air wash over her, until her heart felt light enough to walk home in silence. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The Spirit still moves in quiet places. Even now, He is whispering peace over you. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119:105. The house had gone still. Evelyn's footsteps padded quietly on the hallway rug as she moved toward her room, holding her empty teacup like a memory. She didn't turn on many lights, only the soft lamp by the window. She liked it that way. Too much brightness felt like morning, and she wasn't ready for morning. She was ready for something gentler, a closing of the day, a kind of holy hush. On her nightstand rested a small Bible, its cover cracked and faded, the pages softened by decades of turning. The spine had long ago surrendered to time, no longer stiff, but beautifully broken. Like her, she sat on the edge of her bed, ran her fingers across the edge of the book. She didn't need to open it to find comfort. Just the weight of it in her lap was enough to settle her spirit. But still, she turned to a page that opened easily, as though the book knew exactly what she needed. Isaiah, she smiled. Of course. She began to read in a whisper, more to herself than to the room. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Her voice trembled gently on the words, but not from fear, from reverence. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. She paused, closed her eyes, and in the dim room, with her Bible resting like a quiet flame in her hands, she remembered all the rivers she'd passed through, the years of raising children alone, the diagnosis that took her husband, the long winters when grief moved in and wouldn't leave. But through it all, he had been there, not always in the way she expected, but always in the way she needed. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She had read this Bible when she was 19, on the porch of her first little apartment. Long before gray hair or prescriptions or funerals, she had read it as a young mother, balancing toddlers on her hip, whispering prayers over spilled juice and broken toys. She had read it as a widow, holding it tight on nights when sleep never came. And now, in the quiet of old age, she read it not for answers, but for presence, for the reminder that she was known, held, remembered. She didn't need a sermon tonight. She didn't need deep theology. She just needed the simple, solid truth that God was still speaking and that he had never stopped. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even now, his word still holds you. Every page marked, every promise marked. The moon was written with you in mind. I will lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone. Lord, make me dwell in safety. Psalm 4:8. The covers were turned down. The window cracked just enough to let the breeze speak. And the world, at last, had settled. Evelyn slipped beneath the quilt, her old bones sighing with quiet relief. The fabric smelled of lavender, softly folding comfort from a time long past. She turned off the lamp, and the room filled with stillness. Not silence, but stillness. A kind of sacred quiet that lets your soul unclench. Moonlight traced the edges of the dresser. A clock ticked somewhere near the door, and in that tender hush, Evelyn felt it. Not a feeling, really, but a knowing. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been for decades. Even in the nights when grief had pressed hard. Even in the years when God felt distant, she'd never truly been without him. And now, as her eyes adjusted to the dark, she whispered the only words she felt strong enough to speak. Stay with me tonight, Lord. No flourish, no formality, just longing and love. She lay there, still awake but softened, and imagined Jesus sitting beside her bed, not glowing, not grand, just near, maybe his hand resting on hers, maybe his breath matching her breath. He didn't need her to be anything but present, didn't need her to pray perfectly, didn't need her to fix what had gone wrong. He only needed her to rest, to let him be God, while she stopped trying to carry everything. Take Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, the pines, the porch, the garden. All sleeping now. She thought of the people she missed, some long gone, some just distant. She offered no fancy words for them tonight, only the thought of their names, and trusted that was enough. That God could take even the smallest thoughts and hold them like prayers. And slowly, her body softened, her breathing slowed. Peace came not in a wave, but in a quiet presence that filled the room like warm light you don't notice until it's everywhere. She was safe, not because she had all the answer, but because the shepherd never left her side. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to hold the night together. The shepherd is already keeping watch. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Lamentations 3:22-23. The night passed quietly. No dreams, no urgency, only rest. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the light was soft, a kind of golden hush, filtering in through the lace curtains like a promise. She lay still for a moment, blinking slowly. There was no rush. Not today. Not anymore. The ache in her bones was familiar but not unkind. Just a reminder she had lived. She had loved. She had made it to another morning. And strangely, she did not dread it. For years, mornings had been difficult. The light too sharp, the hours too long, the loneliness echoing louder in the sun than in the dark. But this morning felt different. This morning felt held. She turned her head toward the window. The sky beyond was quiet blue, the kind of blue you see in hymns, soft, everlasting, wide. She whispered aloud, "Thank you for waking me," and meant it. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There had been a time, not too long ago, when she had begged God to take her in the night. Not because she hated life, but because she was tired of it. Tired of the aches, tired of the empty kitchen chairs, tired of feeling unnecessary. But the Lord in his mercy had let her sleep. And now, he had given her another sunrise, and not just to survive it, but to see it. She sat up slowly, her Bible still open beside her. The page had shifted in the breeze during the night. A new passage now. Be still and know that I am God. She smiled, of course. She rose from the bed, not with the strength of youth, but with the grace of surrender. She wasn't in charge of this day, Amaru. She didn't need to be. She only needed to walk through it with him. Bedtime spiritual takeaway morning is no longer something to fear. God's mercies meet you there fresh and faithful. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. Psalm 139:4. After breakfast, just toast and a little honey, Evelyn sat down at her old writing desk. It was tucked beneath the window in the back room, where the sun fell in soft beams across the wood grain, and the quiet held memories like a slow breath. The desk still smelled faintly of cedar and ink. She opened the small drawer, took out her favorite pen, and a piece of cream-colored stationery that had waited patiently all these years. She had written many letters at this desk, some sent, some never mailed. Some simply folded away like prayers too delicate to speak aloud. Today, she didn't know what she would write, but her hands knew, and sometimes that was enough. She dated the top of the page. Though she didn't need to, God already knew what day it was. Then, slowly, she began, "Dear Jesus," and stopped. She sat back for a moment. The words already felt like a release. Not a performance, not a ritual. Just a quiet pouring out of a heart that had carried so much for so long. "I'm not sure why I'm writing this," she continued, "except that I miss you sometimes, even when I know you're near." She paused. "Life has been quieter these days. I'm learning to find you in that quiet, to believe you're sitting beside me when I don't feel you, to trust that you still delight in me, even when I forget who I am. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment." The words kept flowing, soft and unhurried, a kind of sacred conversation. She told him about the ache in her knees, the joy of seeing the first daffodil bloom, the way the moon had looked unusually close last week. And then she said something she hadn't meant to say, but it came anyway. "I'm afraid sometimes, Lord, afraid of leaving this world alone, afraid that when I go, no one will remember the little things I tried to love well." She set the pen down and closed her eyes. She didn't need to write what came next. She could feel the answer settle into her spirit. "I remember every small kindness, every whispered prayer, every unnoticed offering of love. You are not forgotten." She smiled through tears, not sad ones, just the kind that come when something deep inside unclenches. She folded the letter, tucked it into the Bible she'd read the night before, and didn't seal it. It didn't need postage, and it had already been heard. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even the quietest prayers reach heaven. You don't need the right words, just an open heart. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Isaiah 49:16. The afternoon sun warmed the edge of Evelyn's armchair. She sat with her legs tucked beneath a soft quilt, a small plate of shortbread resting on the table nearby. Outside, the garden buzzed with quiet life, bees drowsy on lavender, a sparrow hopping near the fence, and Evelyn's hands lay folded in her lap. Still, softened with age, veins like rivers of time. She looked down at them. These hands had done so much. Held children, folded laundry, rubbed backs in the middle of the night, brushed tears from cheeks hers and others. They'd baked bread and opened Bibles. They'd held letters from the war. They'd written goodbye and welcome and I'm sorry. There were scars now, spots too. She used to hide them, but lately, she had begun to see them differently, not as signs of decline, but as sacred markings, like rings in a tree, like scripture etched deep beneath the skin. She remembered her mother's hands, how they always smelled like rose water and flower, how they had felt cool on her feverish forehead as a child. She missed them. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There was something in her, something wordless, that longed to be held again, not by anyone here, but by the one whose hands bore her name. I've never seen your hands, Lord, she whispered, but I believe they know me. She pictured them, not just the Sunday school paintings, but real hands, calloused from carpentry, gentle from healing, pierced from love. I wonder what it will be like, she murmured, to finally feel them. No fear stirred in her, only longing. For the first time, she realized it wasn't death she feared. It was being forgotten. But these hands, his hands, they had never let go. From the cradle to the kitchen sink, from the hospital waiting rooms to this quiet chair, she had always been held. Always. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You have never been out of his hands. Not once. Not now. Not ever. The Lord your God is with you. the mighty warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. In his love he will no longer rebuke you, but will rejoice over you with singing. Zephaniah 3:17. Evening came again, as it always did, soft and golden at first, then indigo, like velvet drawn over the day. The house settled into its familiar rhythm. The walls creaked gently, as if exhaling after holding so much. The floorboards whispered under quiet steps, and the hum of the refrigerator was steady and low, a kind of lullaby for the faithful. Evelyn moved slowly through the house, turning off lights one by one. She didn't mind the quiet, and in fact, she welcomed it now. It had become a companion. Some nights were lonelier than others, but tonight the house felt alive with peace. She paused in the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe of each room. Here was the nursery, once long turned into a guest room. Here was the study, where her husband used to read aloud. Here, the small linen closet that still smelled like lavender sachets. Memories didn't haunt her. They sang, not loudly, but like the soft hum of a song you used to love, still echoing in the corners of your soul. She made her way back to the living room, lit one small candle on the table, and sat for a while in its glow. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. In the flicker of the flame, she could almost feel the music of the house. The invisible chorus of moments that had once filled these rooms with life. And in that stillness, another thought came, not hers. Something deeper, a sacred nudge. I still sing over you. She closed her eyes. Yes, that's what it was. The silence wasn't empty, it was a song. Not made of melody or chords, but of love. God's love. Rejoicing quietly over one tired, faithful woman who had simply kept showing up. She thought of Zephaniah's words. Words she had read long ago but had only now begun to believe. He rejoices over you with singing. Could that be true even now, even here? She smiled through misty eyes. Yes, bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even in the quiet, God is still singing over you. You are his joy. In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. Isaiah 30:15. The next morning came slowly. There was no alarm, no pressure, just light seeping in gently through the curtains, and the quiet realization she didn't have to do anything. Not today. She sat at the kitchen table in her robe, a small pot of tea warming her hands, and she felt something strange. Peace. There was no list, no urgency, no one expecting her to be strong. The world outside moved along. Cars passed occasionally, birds pecked the ground beneath the feeder. But inside, everything had softened. And Evelyn didn't feel lazy, she felt graced. Once she might have felt guilt in the stillness, like she was wasting time, like she should be useful. But now she knew the truth. Some of the holiest moments come when we stop trying to produce and simply let ourselves be loved. She had nothing to prove, nothing to earn. She was already enough. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She leaned back in the chair, stared out at the small garden. The daffodils didn't strive. They didn't force themselves open. They just bloomed when it was time. And the sparrows, they weren't anxious. They just received, their feathers fluffed in trust. That morning would always come. She smiled softly. It had taken her years to believe that doing nothing was sometimes sacred. Letting the Lord hold you while you simply breathe, that was enough. She poured another cup of tea and whispered aloud, "I don't have much to give today, Jesus. But I'm here." And somehow, that offering felt more than enough. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You are not defined by what you accomplish. There is grace, even in the stillness. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. Psalm 136. There was a window in Evelyn's sitting room that faced the east. Each morning it welcomed the sun, and each evening it held the last golden brushstroke before night returned. It wasn't a grand window, just a square of glass framed by pale curtains, but it had become her watchtower, her place of waiting. Evelyn had always been a watcher. As a young woman, she watched for the mail truck, longing for letters from her husband overseas. As a mother, she had stood at the front porch, watching for headlights that meant her children were safe. And now, she watched less for people and more for presence. She sat in her armchair by the window, a blanket across her knees, and let her eyes rest on the horizon. She wasn't waiting for something dramatic, not a sign, not a miracle, just a touch of him, a whisper in the quiet. She had learned that God often arrived like the dawn, not in a flash, but in slow, steady warmth that crept in without fanfare and changed everything. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She had prayed many times for God to take the ache from her heart, but what he gave her instead was his presence in the ache. And that was somehow more beautiful. She watched as the light shifted outside. A bird flitted from the branch to the feeder. The breeze moved through the garden gate, and she whispered, "I'm still here, Lord, still watching." And somewhere inside, she felt it. So am I. She didn't need more than that. Just the knowing that her waiting was not in vain. Even if the answers didn't come, even if the door never opened, the Lord was on the other side of the window all along. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Waiting is not wasted when you wait with God. He sees you. He sits beside you in the watching. Nothing can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans 8:39. It was late afternoon now, the kind of hour when the sun rests low and the shadows grow long across the living room floor. Evelyn sat with an old photo album on her lap. Its cover was worn, edges fraying slightly, but her hands knew the shape of it by heart. She opened to the first page. There they were, her wedding day. The delicate lace of her dress, the grin on his face before life had carved sorrow into his features. They were so young, so full of hopes they hadn't even dared to name aloud. She turned the page. There were the babies, the birthdays, the camping trips with burnt marshmallows and squeals of laughter, the long-ago Christmas where someone spilled cocoa on the rug, the stain still hidden beneath a corner of furniture. She smiled and blinked away the mist in her eyes. It had all gone so fast. She lingered on one picture, a blurry shot of her husband holding their youngest on his shoulders. She could still remember the sound of their laughter. It echoed now, not in the room but in her heart. He had been gone for nearly a decade, and still, she loved him. But love like that doesn't disappear, not when it's held in God. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She whispered into the stillness. Thank you for letting me love him. And thank you for still holding that love, even now. Her fingers brushed the photo like it might warm under her touch, and she felt it a nearness, a comfort not bound by time. Maybe love, real love, was never meant to be left behind. Maybe it lingers. maybe it grows even deeper once heaven is part of it. She thought of the verse again. Nothing can separate us. Not death, not silence, not the long stretch of years. What she once feared losing, God had quietly held for her all along. Love didn't die, it simply moved to safer hands. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. The love you've given and received is not lost. God keeps it. He cherishes it. And one day you'll see it whole again. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Psalm 23:5. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long beams of amber across the kitchen floor. Evelyn stood by the counter, a small pot of soup warming on the stove, just enough for one. She moved slowly, not out of weakness, but out of reverence for the quiet. She set the table gently, one bowl, one spoon, a cloth napkin folded with care. She lit a candle in the center, a small ritual, but to her it was sacred. There was a time when the table had been full, noisy, overflowing with elbows and laughter and can you pass the rolls, but now it was simple. And surprisingly, there was peace in that. She sat down, gave thanks, not just for the food, but for the presence she knew was already there. Lord, she whispered, thank you for sitting with me. Because she knew He did. She didn't need to imagine a glowing vision. She didn't need theatrics. The quiet was enough. Somehow, it always had been. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She remembered the days when she used to feel embarrassed eating alone in public. She avoided the little tables near the windows, afraid people would pity her. But now she understood something deeper. You can be alone and still not be lonely. Not when the one who made you pulls up a chair beside your spirit. She took a spoonful of soup. It was warm and soft, just the way she liked it. And for a moment, she imagined Jesus at the other seat. Not speaking, just smiling. Not rushing her, just keeping her company. She had never been a fancy hostess, but she believed somewhere deep in her bones that He came to simple tables. Tables set for one, lit by candlelight, where faith was not loud, but steady. Where love was not shouted, but served. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Even when no one else is at your table, God is. He never turns down an invitation from the lonely. He will cover you with His feathers, and under His wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. It was nearly bedtime again. The house, dim and restful, seemed to prepare itself for sleep along with Evelyn. The teacup had been rinsed and set upside down to dry. The doors were locked, the garden hushed. And upstairs, on the edge of her bed, rested a folded quilt faded in color but rich in memory. It had been stitched by her grandmother many years ago. Soft blues, gentle grays, tiny hand-sewn flowers that had long since frayed. Evelyn picked it up slowly, pressing it to her chest for a moment before unfolding it across her bed. This wasn't just fabric, it was a story. Each square had its own silent voice. The worn corner where a child once clung during a fevered night. The tiny tea stain from the afternoon her friend came crying. The mended patch from when the dog had chewed the edge in his youth. It was a blanket, yes, but also a witness. It had covered sorrows and laughter, fear and healing, nights of deep sleep and nights of long weeping. And through it all, it had stayed, like God. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She sat on the edge of the bed, fingers moving slowly along the stitches, and whispered, "You were with me then too, weren't you?" She wasn't talking to the quilt. She was talking to the Lord who had wrapped her in mercy long before she knew what mercy meant. So many times, she had pulled this blanket up to her chin not just for warmth, but for comfort. And now, she realized, it had become holy, not because of the thread, but because of the prayers it had heard, because of the tears it had absorbed, because of the peace that came every time she hid beneath it and trusted that she was not alone. She turned off the lamp, laid back, and pulled the blanket over her shoulders once more. It covered her like a quiet promise, like wings. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. God's love is like a well-worn quilt, soft, steady, stitched into every corner of your life. You are always held. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. 1 Corinthians 13:12. The night was very still. The stars outside blinked gently, as if God himself were breathing slowly over the world. And in her room, wrapped in her grandmother's quilt, Evelyn lay quietly. Not asleep, but not quite awake either. There was a strange kind of peace in that space, that tender in-between, where time stretches and the soul can listen more clearly than it can speak. Her breathing was slow, even, each inhale a quiet yes, each exhale a letting go. And in that quiet, something shifted. Not in the room, not in her body, but in her spirit. She felt near to something she couldn't explain, near to someone. It wasn't frightening, not at all. It was like standing at the shoreline and sensing the presence of the ocean long before you see the waves. There were no voices, no visions, just a nearness that made her eyes brim without knowing why. She whispered one word, soft as breath against the darkness. "Jesus." And it felt like that whisper had traveled less than an inch to reach him. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. For a moment, just one. She wondered if heaven was brushing against her shoulder, not to take her, but to remind her that it was real, that it was waiting, that it wasn't far. She thought of her husband, of her mother's hands, of the babies she had lost before they ever spoke a word. Were they there, smiling safe? She didn't try to answer it. She didn't need to. Some truths are best felt, not explained. She turned her head on the pillow and closed her eyes. A soft breeze moved through the slightly cracked window. The curtain shifted, almost like a hand reaching gently for her shoulder. She smiled, sleep tugging at the corners of her mind. And before she drifted off, one quiet thought found her. I am known, I am loved, and I am already halfway home. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Heaven is not far, and the one who waits for you there is already with you here. Do not despise these small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin. Zechariah 4:10. The next morning came quietly. A beam of soft light rested on the windowsill, touching the wooden cross that hung above the bed. The birds were already singing, not loudly but gently, as if they knew someone nearby was waking slowly. Evelyn blinked her eyes open. Her body felt heavy, but her heart light. She sat up carefully, pulling the quilt around her shoulders, and took in the soft stillness of the room. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet everything felt touched by grace. She shuffled to the kitchen in her slippers, boiled water for tea, and placed a single slice of bread in the toaster. As she waited, she looked around, at the chipped mug, at the stack of envelopes she still hadn't mailed, at the tiny vase of dried flowers on the shelf. Ordinary things, but in them peace. She didn't need grandeur anymore, didn't crave the big answers or the rush of feeling important. She was learning something truer. God meets us in small things. The butter spreading across warm toast, the creak of the same chair she sat in every morning, the steady hum of life moving gently forward even when we no longer strive to push it. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She sat at the table and bowed her head. "Thank you," she said. No list followed. No long explanation. Just thanks for smallness, for slowness, for this. She remembered a time when she prayed for God to use her, to do something big, to leave a mark. But now, she realized the mark had already been made in casseroles delivered to grieving neighbors, in lullabies hummed while holding fevered children, in letters written by hand when no one else remembered to call. Those things had mattered, even if no one praised them, even if they were never recorded. God had seen them, and God rejoiced. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. It's okay to live a quiet life. God finds joy in the smallest acts of love. You are not overlooked. I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John 8:12. Evening returned, as it always did. The wind was gentle, brushing softly through the trees as the last of the sunlight melted into dusky gold. Evelyn stepped out onto her front porch, a mug of tea in her hands, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The world felt quieter than usual, not sad, just still. Like creation itself was catching its breath. The porch light flickered on behind her just as it always had, every evening without being asked. It was an old bulb now, the glass a little cloudy, but it still shone. Faithfully, softly, she stood near it, one hand resting on the post, and watched the first stars appear one by one. And something about the light, that small, steady glow, spoke to her. Not in words, but in peace. It had been left on for many people over the years, for children who came home late, for neighbors who needed help, for friends who stopped by with tear-streaked faces and trembling hands. The porch light never judged, it just welcomed. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Evelyn thought of her life that way now. Not a spotlight, not a headline. Just a warm little light set on a porch, burning quietly through the night for anyone who might be looking for home. She smiled and whispered, "Lord, thank you for being my light, and thank you for letting me be one too." She wasn't famous, never had been, but she had loved well. And the older she grew, the more she realized that's all the light ever needs to do. It doesn't have to blind, it doesn't have to impress, it just needs to shine and point the way. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. You don't have to be big or loud to make a difference. Just shine where you are. Love is light enough. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Psalm 119:105. Evelyn sat in her favorite chair, a well-worn quilt draped over her knees. On the small table beside her rested an open book, its pages marked with folded corners and penciled notes. It was a book she had begun long ago, one that promised wisdom and comfort. But life had interrupted days filled with unexpected moments, nights heavy with restless thoughts. She looked at the lines she had underlined, the sentences that had once spoken deeply to her heart, and she smiled softly. It didn't matter that she hadn't finished. The journey was in the reading, in the quiet moments spent with words that lifted her spirit. Sometimes, she thought, faith was like this book, not something to rush through, but to return to again and again, finding new meaning with each visit. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. She closed the book gently, knowing she would come back to it when her heart was ready, when the answers weren't so important as the presence, because sometimes it was enough just to sit with God in the pauses, to listen more than speak, to rest more than strive. And in that rest, she found a peace that carried her through every unfinished page. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. It's okay not to have all the answers. God meets you in the quiet pauses, in the unfinished parts of your story. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Lamentations 3:22-23. The first light of dawn slipped quietly through the curtains. Evelyn stirred beneath her quilt, feeling the gentle tug of morning's invitation. She did not rush to rise. Instead, she lingered in the soft space between sleep and waking, allowing her heart to welcome the day with slow gratitude. Each morning was a promise not of perfection or ease or even understanding, but of mercy, fresh and waiting. A new gift wrapped in the quiet hours, offered by a God who never tires of beginning again. She smiled softly, remembering the many mornings she had greeted with fear, worry pressing on her chest like heavy stones. But today was different. Today, she breathed in peace. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. There was something sacred in this gentle awakening, a whisper reminding her no matter how dark the night, no matter how weary the soul, the sun would rise again. And with it, God's faithfulness would shine softly, surely, steadily, like a lamp lighting her steps. She rose slowly, feet touching the floor with reverence, and whispered a prayer of thanks, knowing this new day was a gift, not because of what she could do, but because of who was with her. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Every morning is a fresh start. God's love never fails. His mercies are new for you, today and always. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. John 14:27. The day's last light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across Evelyn's room. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed, feeling the weight of the day gently lifting. Outside, the world was slowing, the hush of evening wrapping everything in calm, the familiar quiet of home, a sanctuary for her tired soul. She reached for her Bible, the pages worn but steady beneath her fingers. She didn't read tonight, not with her eyes but with her heart, letting the stillness speak louder than words. She thought of the peace Jesus promised, a peace unlike any other, not dependent on circumstance or understanding, but a deep, abiding calm that settles the spirit. Take a deep breath. Rest here for a moment. Evelyn whispered a soft prayer. Let your peace guard my heart tonight. Let me rest in your love, safe and unafraid. The shadows deepened, but she did not fear the night, for she was held not just by blankets and walls, but by a love that would never let go. And as she closed her eyes, a gentle smile curved her lips. The last light before sleep, a promise wrapped in quiet. Bedtime spiritual takeaway. Let Jesus' peace guard your heart tonight. You are safe. You are loved. Rest in Him.